World War II went from 1939 to 1945. It was the bloodiest war in history, with 70 million military and civilian deaths, from the Jews in Europe to the troops in Africa and the Soviet civilians. People just like us. They all had families, hopes, and dreams. However, they were cut short due to World War II. Hitler's invasions were quite effective, and whether you like him or not, no one can deny Adolf Hitler was a military genius, with great tactics, weapons, and manpower to back him up. The Nazi war machine was a powerful force. The fact is that the Germans had a tactic that should not have worked on paper, but in practice it worked fantastically. That tactic was blitzkrieg. The term blitzkrieg, which means lightning war in German, was first used by Time magazine and not the Germans. Blitzkrieg involves a mass of troops rushing a position. It was used to conserve artillery and manpower. It was first developed in World War I to break up the trench warfare, but was first used in Poland in 1939. Its most famous use is in Belgium. Hitler wanted to invade France, but their borders were heavily fortified. So Nazi Germany decided to conduct their invasion through neutral Belgium. The German troops gathered at the border and made a break for the coast through Belgium, and trapped the joint British and French troops at Dunkirk. The Germans also had quite a significant arsenal of weaponry. The Kar 98K was a standard infantry rifle for the Nazis, while the M1 Garand was the standard rifle for the U.S. infantry. The German Kar 98K was a well-constructed bolt-action rifle which could hold 7.29 by 57 millimeter rounds, with good accuracy at long ranges. The M1 Garand was a semi-auto rifle. The rifle could hold 8 30 caliber rounds. While the Kar 98K was very accurate and had a serious caliber, the M1 Garand had one major advantage over the Kar 98K. The M1 Garand was semi-automatic. Even though the Germans lacked firepower and guns, they had the Panzerschreck. The Panzerschreck was a very powerful tank with vastly superior mobility, firepower, and horsepower. They were a very formidable force on the battlefield, able to overpower most tanks and infantry. The American Sherman was vastly outclassed for the beginning of the war. While the Americans were vastly outclassed in tank warfare, the Americans vastly outclassed the Nazis in aerial and naval combat. The German Navy used U-boats to stall and hinder the American war effort, except for the fact that anti-submarine technology had advanced to a reasonable level of effectiveness. The German Navy also had to go up against the might of the British Navy. The Americans have aerial superiority as well. The German Luftwaffe was inferior to the American P-51 in every way, with superior mobility, firepower, and speed. It made this aircraft great at dogfights. Now let's take a look at Hitler's first major invasion in the tundra of Poland.
Poland was the first major invasion done by Hitler. The invasion started with Germany signing a non-aggression pact with the USSR in fear that they would come to Poland's aid during the attack. The attack was set to start on August 26th, but he had delayed the attack when he learned that Britain had signed a treaty with Poland to provide military support should it be attacked. After Hitler learned about this, he delayed the attack until September 1st, when the attack started. When the attack started, Britain and France demanded that Germany withdraw from Poland or they would be declaring war by September 3rd. Germany had never withdrawn from Poland, and Britain and France had declared war, starting in World War II. When Germany began invading Poland, they employed a strategy called blitzkrieg. In Poland, Germany was destroying the country. They tore through Poland using panzer tanks. While this attack was happening on the ground, the German Air Force, known as the Luftwaffe, destroyed all of Poland's air capability and bombed Polish cities. Poland was being abolished by Germany, but they were hoping to hold off long enough so an attack against Germany could be made from the west. But on September 18th, the Soviets invaded Poland from the east and all hope was lost.
May 10th, 1940. Belgium was attacked by the Nazis, but we should investigate prior to this. Before Belgium was attacked, Hitler wanted countries to surrender to his army by telling their naval leaders to surrender or feel my wrath. All countries besides Belgium surrendered to the ruthless Nazis. Hitler wasn't stopping there. He sent a horde of soldiers to Belgium to forcibly make Belgium surrender. Belgium denied their acceptance and said that they were going to fight to their death. Hitler went neutral and sent his troops to the southwest side of Germany to take Belgium. While the Nazis were waiting to attack, Belgium became aggressive and started attacking them ruthlessly. This period was known as the 18-Day Campaign. Approximately 6,000 people died in the 18-Day Campaign. During the 19th day, Hitler put an idea he had for a long time in motion. He sent half his troops to a place called the Ardennes. This technique was supposedly good for the Nazis because they knew this place was inhabited and impenetrable because of all its hills and miles of forest. Belgium was unaware of this occurrence when Hitler was planning to attack. Hitler had no more. He sent his armies to charge through Belgium to invade as quickly as they could. The Nazis decided to send thousands of refugees to the west to try to distract France and Britain from stopping the Nazis. As the Allies were slowed down from the refugees, Hitler sent more of his army to the Ardennes to knock down 50 Duroc divisions that charged through southern Belgium. As the Nazis charged through southern Belgium, they cut the Allies off from escaping the Nazis. This tactic was major to the German army and was also known as blitzkrieg. They circled in by the Nazis and had nowhere to go. Luckily, the British were at Dunkirk, a beach at the English Channel. British armies were forced to call help to try to get away. British ships came through at Dunkirk to pick their armies up from the Nazis. British got away safely and would later see the Nazis again.
Hitler's plan to win World War II was similar to that of Germany's in World War I. He would simply rush through France, take out Britain, who would back France, then betray Russia, invade them, winning the war. France had become very prideful after the First World War and hadn't advanced their military in the ways that other world powers had, such as Britain, Germany, and one of Hitler's most dangerous enemies, the United States. Due to this, Hitler did not expect too much trouble invading France. The Maginot Line replaced the crude trenches in which so much of the 1914-18 war was fought. These were essentially mini-forts that were supposed to protect the east side of France. Hitler decided he wanted no part in that, so he needed to find a different way to invade France, and he did. There's just one slight problem. Hitler had to invade a different country, Belgium. However, Belgium refused to surrender. Hitler decided that they needed to feel his wrath. Belgium fought to the death, slowing Hitler's army down. In addition to this, Britain was ticked off that Germany invaded a neutral country and sent troops to back France. Hitler's decision to invade Belgium is not all that surprising, so the Allies had some extra time to prepare. Hitler countered this by sending masses of refugees and civilians toward the British and French armies. As a result, the French had to move towards the Nazis, leaving an area called the Ardennes unprotected. The Ardennes are primarily hills and forests, while the Germans were about to penetrate it. While 50 Duroc divisions were moving through the Ardennes, others were charging to meet the French and British troops at France's border. Due to the fact that Hitler had sent masses of refugees westward, he slowed the Allies down, allowing Hitler's southern armies to blitzkrieg around the Allies' southern flank and trapping them at Dunkirk, knocking out some of France's best forces, while most British troops escaped across the English Channel. After this crushing defeat, Hitler swept through France, however let its existence continue as a puppet state on its southern side while annexing the northern part for himself. All around, life in occupied France was miserable, especially for any types of minorities, and Hitler's atrocities were just beginning. This was Hitler's last piece of the plan. Hitler was considered insane for trying to invade Russia or the USSR, however he came dangerously close to taking it. Throughout the war, the US and Britain had warned Joseph Stalin, the USSR dictator, of an attack, but he didn't listen. During the summer of 1941, Hitler began one of the world's largest invasions in history. To put it simply, the Russians were annihilated, battle after battle, as the Nazis used massive blitzkrieg maneuvers, surrounding masses of Russians and taking thousands of prisoners. Nazis were sweeping through Russia, but Hitler was getting worried. The Soviets would not surrender or sue for peace. After a few months, disaster struck. Winter came. The Nazis had never felt winter's wrath at this scale. Hitler had not prepared his troops for the cold and had expected Stalin to sue for peace by now. Soon the oil in the Nazis' vehicles was literally freezing, and Hitler's generals had wanted to dig in for the winter, which is along the lines of setting camp. But Hitler was inconsiderate and told his generals to keep moving, and that the USSR would soon surrender. Finally, Stalin sent special forces trained to fight specifically in Russia's cruel environment. The Nazis were pushed back and eventually had to dig in for the winter, a costly defeat due to Hitler's inconsiderate and slightly arrogant decisions.
Finally, spring came. During the winter, the USSR had time to reinforce their army and had moved their factories to construct everything needed to counter Hitler's ongoing invasion. Hitler tried to avoid this by attempting to block the USSR from getting their oil. Then Hitler made a mistake he could never take back. While trying to take out the USSR forces and block them from the Caucasus, Hitler split his 4th Panzer Army away from their main army, sending them to the Caucasus, and the army that was left was mainly routed to conquer surrounding cities and cut the other Russian armies from their oil and other resources. The 6th Army needed to defeat and complete an encircling maneuver along against the Russian force at Stalingrad. After fierce fighting and a lot of time, more and more Russian troops were showing up, and now it was their turn to encircle the Nazis. This mimicked the German blitzkrieg, trapping the Sixth Army, whom Hitler ordered to stay in their position. They were eventually surrounded and defeated, and Hitler's progress began to be erased, and with the control of the air, the USSR pushed them to the border, a crushing defeat for Hitler and the Nazis.
Though Finland isn't mentioned as much as other countries when talking about World War II, it still had an involvement with Germany and the USSR. For Finland, World War II was split into three parts: the Winter War, the Continuation War, and the Lapland War. While the Winter War only involved Finland and the USSR, Germany did get involved in later wars. During interpeace, the time between the Winter War and the Continuation War, Finland knew they would not be able to defend themselves from the USSR if they would be attacked again. Finland decided that they would ally with Germany and allow German troops to occupy Lapland, the northern half of Finland. On June 25, 1941, the Soviet Union launched an air raid on the Finnish cities. Soon after, Finland, with Germany as their ally, declared war on the Soviet Union, fighting to gain back the lost territories. Throughout the Continuation War, Finland was urged by the Allies to disassociate itself from Germany. But Critzize, Finland's president, personally guaranteed Germany that Finland would not negotiate a treaty with the Soviet Union while he was in power. Soon after, Viet resigned from office, and Carl Gustav Eamon Mahanahan was appointed as president and charged with the task of negotiating a peace treaty. The Moscow Armistice was a treaty signed by Finland and the Soviet Union, which officially ended the Continuation War. In the Moscow Armistice, Finland was forced to return the land that they had taken, control of legalized communist parties, ban fascist organizations, and to rid of German troops on Finnish land. When fighting initially broke out, both sides were cautious because of their previous alliance. Only with increasing pressure from the Soviet Union to take more action in getting rid of the Germans did Finland become more hostile in doing so. While the Germans fled, they destroyed everything in their path, completely decimating towns and villages.
Hitler managed to conquer much of Europe and along with the Soviet Union. Much of Europe was under control by one of the two factions, with a major exceptions being the Iberian Peninsula, Sweden, and Switzerland. But it all came crashing down to the lack of supplies and getting very arrogant, and not having the ability to realize that fascism is a very flawed system.
Adolf Hitler may have been a psychotic maniac who committed an incredible amount of atrocities during his reign of terror. However, he was a military genius and managed to conquer nearly the entirety of Europe and Russia, with arrogance for the longest time being his only enemy. As his progress began to be turned around, the Americans, with the help of their remaining allies, and thanks to them, 70 million military and civilian deaths were not in vain, and their hopes and dreams will live on, and so will the American dream. We can only hope that no such atrocity will happen in the world's history ever again, and we can thank the sacrifices of the millions dead for this.